please stand for our opening song? We will be singing Joyful, Joyful, hymn number 12.
We're happy to have Steve Lloyd with us this morning, and so I'll turn the time over to him.
Thank you, Don. So I'm glad to be here this morning. I know a bunch of you, but some of you may not know me. I'm an elder at the Hot Springs Church, your little brother down the road. So it's a real privilege for me to be in the big church in the district today. So I've been an engineer in the mining business for 43 years. And so I've been in 5 different mines here in the Northwest, serving as a metallurgist, a manager, a maintenance manager. So it's been a really quite an experience. About 35 of those years has been as a Seventh-day Adventist. So I've had my eyes open as I've gone around to all the mines I've been at, either the underground mines or open pit mines, to see the evidences of God's creation. And it's really fascinating. I'll give you an example. At the Troy mine, where I served at, underground, about 1,000 feet below the surface, there was big bands of dark mineral. They were about like this, about 4 feet deep. They looked like congealed chocolate milk. They were called argillite or mudstone. So you think to yourself, well, how'd that mudstone get 1,000 feet below the surface? So there's all kinds of fantastic things to see in the mines. And today I'm going to give you a kind of a quick talk about rocks. After all this time, I thought I'd get my courage up and give a little talk, enter into the fray over evolution and creation, because there's certainly a fray, and it impacts our young people in particular. All faiths will tell you that the number one reason why children leave the church is the conflict between science and the Bible. But there really isn't a problem with good science in the Bible. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So in the Bible, the opening line says this. This is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So that's our theme today. And as we go along, I'll be talking about that a little more. We can see the evidences of God's creation in the things that He has made. So in the earth, there's many kinds of rocks. And you might be familiar with these. There's sedimentary rocks, and sedimentary rocks make up about 75% of all the rocks on the surface of the earth. So whether you're in India or Africa or China, Mongolia, or America, sedimentary rocks like this rock, this is a good example of a sedimentary rock. It's got layers in it. You can see the layers in the rock. These rocks are made up of sand, they're made up of silt, they're made up of clay, they're made up of mud. Sometimes they're made up of conglomerates, sometimes they're made up of boulders. But they're all cemented in place. In order for a rock like this, or sand, or silt, or clay to become rock, it needs to be lithified, which means that a solution came through it of either silica or calcium carbonate generally, and that silica or calcium carbonate made this into rock. So that's called lithification. So there's another kind of rock is metamorphic rock, and here in Montana we have a lot of metamorphic rock. Metamorphic rock has been basically pressure cooked. So heat and pressure have made it into something else. This is a good example of marble. This is Montana marble. You've heard of marble in like Italy, but this is Montana marble. Marble is made from limestone that has been cooked high pressure and temperature underground. This is a little piece of limestone. It's not much to look at, but you take this and cook it at the right temperature pressure, you get this. So Montana marble, pretty cool. So there's a lot of metamorphic rocks in Montana. Over where I work in the Butte, Helena area, there's a lot of this mica schist. If you go up in the Tobacco Root Mountains, a beautiful walk up there. If you've not been to the South Boulder, you ought to go. It's one of the prettiest places in Montana. Lots and lots and lots of mica schist. Mica is a metamorphic mineral. So you see those out in the woods a lot. And then also we have the igneous rocks, which are the volcanic rocks. So you've seen volcanic rocks in Hawaii. You see them in Idaho, the craters of the moon. You see them in Greenland. So there are a lot of volcanoes going off still today. And so we have metamorphic rocks. We have basalt, we have rhyolite, we have dacite, we have andesite, 4 different kinds of igneous rocks. In Montana, there's a lot of volcanic activity over where I work in the Butte area in Whitehall. It's underlain by what they call the Butte Pluton. So a pluton is a igneous mass that is cooled down. So that pluton covers a lot of ground, goes out towards Anaconda, out towards Dillon, up towards Boulder, out towards the Elkhorn Mountains. It covers a lot of ground under the earth. And that pluton produced a lot of metamorphic rocks. One of the mines I work at the Elkhorn mine, is a metamorphic deposit because of the Butte Pluton. So a lot of cool rocks out there. So the controversy is the trouble is our interpretation of rock. Everybody agrees on the 3 kinds of rocks, whether you're an evolutionist or a creationist. But what's in the rocks is the trouble. And it's not really the minerals that are in the rocks, it's the fossils and the other things that are in rocks that give people heartburn. And so we're talking about that a bit today. So when we think about fossils, or we think about science, I was really blessed years ago. My family and I were in Weimar, California, and we had the privilege of meeting Karen Jensen. Karen Jensen was a creation scientist at Weimar. And she had dedicated her life to creation science. She had never married. When we knew her, she had 34 years in as creation scientist. We had her come to the Colfax Church there in California where we were ministering, and she did a creation seminar for us. And she talked about 2 different kinds of science. And one is called operational science. It's the science you're familiar with. And one is called historical science. Operational science is the one that we depend on every day. And that's not a problem for us. And there's no conflict between the Bible and operational science. Operational science is the one where you have an hypothesis, idea, and then you test that idea to try to come to a conclusion. It's repeatable. You can do it in the lab over and over again. So we're familiar with operational science, and it works really well for us. So, we don't have a problem with that, either creationists or evolutionists. It's historical science that is the problem. So when we have things that happen in the past that we can't repeat or we can't duplicate in the lab, then your interpretation of those results is where we get into trouble. And so when we look at the evolution-creation debate, It's really the interpretation of historical science that is the problem. So by the time I get done today, hopefully you'll see that the creation point of view is a better interpretation of the evidence in the field than evolution. Okay, we're both in the same camp. We're trying to understand or interpret historical science, but I think as we go along here, we'll see that the creation point of view is a better fit than evolution. Okay, so to start with, it's important to understand that under the evolutionary worldview, each layer of rock, like when you go to the Grand Canyon, you see all these wonderful layers of rocks. Those layers of rocks were formed. The animals or the creatures inside of those rocks were all formed by random mutation and natural selection. This is their point of view. And those animals and creatures that are in the rocks lived and became extinct in that layer of rock. Okay, so that's the evolutionary worldview. Okay, those rock layers took millions of years to form. The creatures inside those layers lived and died in that rock layer. Okay, there's some problems with that. When you look at the rocks, when you look at the layers of rocks on the earth today, they're all given labels or names, and we're not going to get into that too much today, but the Precambrian rock is the basement rocks, and just above them is the Cambrium. And that Cambrium is called the Cambrium explosion, because the Precambrium is barren for the most part. It has a little pollen in it, some things like that, very simple life forms, very, very little in the Precambrium. But the Cambrium layer is full of fully developed creatures of every kind. So it's called the Cambrium explosion. So it's that way across the world. This is a cool little documentary here called Darwin's Dilemma. In this video, they talk about the Cambrium explosion around the world, whether it's in Japan or China, in Canada. They give many, many examples of the Cambrium explosion occurring around the world. So all of a sudden in the rock record, you have many, many, many different kinds of creatures fully developed in the Cambrium rock layer. So under the this idea of random selection and random mutation and natural selection that Darwin came up with, there should be lots and lots of transitional forms. So in order for mutation to be beneficial, they claim that it took millions of years for a bug to become a fish or whatever, but there was many mutations that were not beneficial. My brother Jim has a little boy that is a Rubinstein-Tabes boy. He's actually in his 30s now, but he was missing a half a chromosome when he was born, and he has got about 7 things that are very common for Rubinstein-Tabes babies. His thumbs were kicked out, his big toes were kicked out, his tongue was tied, he was cross-eyed, he had a hole in his heart. None of those are beneficial mutations. Okay, so there should be those kind of mutations for the creatures in the rock record. Darwin thought in his day that for sure, as the rock record is more developed, that those transitional forms would become apparent, but that has not happened. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of museums around the world. They're full of all kinds of cool fossils, like this one. But none of those museums have transitional species in them. So this is a big problem, and Darwin even admitted during his lifetime that if those intermediate fossils were not found in a rock record, then his theory would not be valid. So we would say today, well, it's been 160 years, they haven't found any transitional species, so really his theory is not valid. So when we hear someone say that if evolution is a fact, we would say, well, that's not really the case. The field evidence would say that's not the case. We haven't found a transitional species in the rock record that we thought we would find. I'm going to pass this around. You guys can look at this, be a little careful with it, but you can look at this and pass it around. It's really cool. This little rock is from, this fossil is from Fossil Butte down in Kimmer, Wyoming. You can go to Fossil Butte. They have a beautiful Fish, Wildlife, and Park museum there full of all kinds of creatures in stone. But you can go to the bottom of the hill. There's a private gallery called Ulcher's Gallery, and you can actually purchase little specimens like this one. They can go from big to little. They're gigantic to little. And then my daughter and her husband and I went on a expedition there. You can actually go there and go out in the field and dig and look for fossils yourself. We spent about 2 hours there one day. We found about 50 fish. We found a stingray. It was just incredible digging in the shale ourselves and finding these perfectly preserved fish. I found one that there was a big piece of rock like this, and you could see there was something inside of it. You could see a kind of a bony ridge inside of it. I got my courage up after a while. I finally got that thing opened up, and when I did, I opened that up, I could smell fish. Now that specimen was 4,500 years old, but yet I could smell fish when I opened that thing up and finally saw that almost perfectly preserved fish in that stone. So this is really cool, and that really talks about rapid burial. In order to have a fossil look like this fossil that's going around, that fossil had to be buried in a very big hurry. Otherwise, natural processes take over, and there's not much left in just a very short time. So that's the deal here. As we think about the fossil record, we think about dating, we think about all the things that are going on in science. A lot of that, once the scientists kind of got the idea that the simple life forms were at the bottom, and they got a little more complex as they went up, then Darwin came up, and many other scientists. He's not alone in this whole thing. There's many scientists involved with Darwin back in those days, the mid-1800s. Charles Lyell, he wrote his Principles of Geology back in those days. He had a 3-volume set. That set of books went through 11 editions by the turn of the century, by 1900. 11 editions of Lyell's Principles of Geology. So Darwin was not alone in this whole thing. So when you think about the stuff you hear today in the news, like dating and things like that, it's kind of a circular reasoning going on about a lot of that. They expect to see fossils in certain arrangement around the world, and they really want the dating to come out to verify their ideas about the fossils. So there's quite a bit of circular reasoning going on as far as radiometric dating, carbon-14 dating. It needs to come out so that the fossils are lined up in their way of thinking. Now the creation way of thinking is a little different because we believe in the Word of God, and the Bible talks about not only creation in 6 literal days, but also talks about a global flood. So today, the creation scientists use the creation flood model to help us interpret what we see in the earth. A few years ago, we had Michael Ord here in this church. You remember that. Michael came and spoke, did 3 talks for us, did a great job. Since then, Michael has got with Dr. Robert Carter, and he's written this book. This is Biblical Geology 101. So it's a great reference if you want to follow up on biblical geology. This is a terrific book. It's simple to read. It's simple to understand. Michael and Robert have done a great job putting together a volume that you can get something out of. It's especially great for young people. And in the back of this book, I'm gonna leave this up here at the end. This is put out by Creation Ministries International. There are just tons and tons of references here in the back of the book as far as other stuff that is available for young people. Whether you're young or old, there's all kinds of wonderful references in the back. So feel free to come up here. You can take pictures of this or write down some of the references so you can see what's going on. One of the guys in the back is Jonathan Sephardi. He is a PhD in biology. He's kind of going head-to-head with Richard Dawkins. You know, Richard Dawkins is head of paleontology at Oxford University in England. He's kind of the head atheist on the planet. He's written a book, The Greatest Show on Earth, talking about the Bible and the fact that it's not trustworthy. But Jonathan Sephardi has gone head-to-head with him. And so you can get a lot of, if you're curious about this, you want to follow it up for your kids, your grandkids, there's lots of great information from Creation Ministries International. So the flood model really changes how we think about the earth. Michael Ord, when he was here, talked a lot about geomorphology. Geo is earth and morphology is shape, and so geomorphology is the shape of the earth. As we think about it, we see the earth and we see what's going on in the earth, we say, wow, something really big happened here. Like we look at the Grand Canyon. Many other big things in the earth were shaped by rushing water. And today we have a lot of examples about rushing water. The Glen Canyon Dam in Colorado was a good example of that, how they opened up this, you remember they opened up the spillway, or one of the big discharge tunnels, and all of a sudden the dam started to shake, and the water turned color. Well, they took out the entire tunnel because the water was cavitating, and the cavitation just destroys steel, concrete in a very short time. So that was a Glen Canyon Dam. You remember up in Oroville, California, there was the dam overtopped, and it took out a gigantic amount of rock, about 1,300 feet long, 160 feet wide, about 40 feet deep in a few minutes. So rushing water is very tremendous power. And so the creation scientists have put together some pretty cool models looking at the earth and the ministry really of the flood. And so when you look at the flood itself, we know in the Bible that it rained really hard. The water came from the earth and from the sky for 40 days and 40 nights. And so that's called the inundation period of the flood. As the water was coming down and it started filling the earth up, we would expect to see a lot of sediments. And around the earth today, you see where animals were all pushed together. Craig, Colorado has a dinosaur museum, and there's lots and lots and lots of different kind of dinosaurs all pushed together in a big dinosaur graveyard. Those graveyards are common around the world. In Price, Utah, there's a coal mine there. You might remember Dr. Robert Gentry. Robert Gentry went underground into the Price coal mines, and he looked up into the coal in the back or the roof of the mine, and here was these dino tracks in the coal. You can actually go to Price, Utah, to the Eastern Utah Dino Museum there in Price, Utah, and the place is full of all kinds of dino tracks, from big to little. They're all around the room. There's a model there that shows where in the mine they found those tracks. So the dinos were trying to stay on top of, as material was coming into that area in Price, Utah, the dinos were trying to stay on top of all that sediment, and they left their footprints behind. Okay, so that's a very interesting thing. Just talks about the crisis. So the dinos really kind of died out during the inundatory part of the flood. So as the water was building up to cover the whole earth, the dinos would eventually run out of ground, as people did too. And so we would expect the dinos to perish in the inundatory part of the flood. So, and you see there's actually quite a few places on the earth where there's dino tracks in the rock itself. So there'll be some rock, and there'll be a dino tracks going across the rock. That's really fascinating because most of those tracks are straight or maybe slightly curved. Most animals, when they're grazing or they're eating, they're kind of wandering around aimlessly. But most of these tracks are straight. They've also found tracks where part of the tracks are in rock, and then they just see claw marks where they were swimming or partially underwater. So the dinos were trying to stay on top. Montana's kind of rich as far as dino stuff. We have duck-billed dinosaurs. We have stegosauruses up in Montana. We have T-Rexes in Montana. Most of those are in the Morrison Foundation or the Morrison Formation. The Morrison goes from Arizona clear up into Canada, so it's a very large formation, and that's where the big dinos are here in Montana. So I was just at the museum in Bozeman. If you haven't been there for a while, you ought to go. They got a great deal there on Montana fossils, from turtles to mammoths. They've got a terrific display there of fossils that were found in Montana. And you can disregard the evolutionary stuff and still have a real blessing by going to the museum there and seeing all the different life that was before now. So a lot of stuff is, when you go to Bozeman and look at all these species there, the turtles, all the different things that are there in Bozeman, they're like that fish that's going around. They're very well preserved. So they were buried in a very big hurry, because that's the only way that fossils can be preserved so well, is by rapid burial, which makes good sense with the flood. So there would have been a lot of sediments, there would have been a lot of commotion going on as there was all this upheaval in the very beginning, the first 40 days. But then there was 150 days when it was pretty still until it started to go down, right? And so then the Bible talks about how the mountains went up and the oceans went down. That's Psalms 104, 6 through 9. So as the mountains went up, and we see the uplift here in Montana, the beautiful mountains like the Mission Mountains. We go up into the Rocky Mountains up in Canada. You see these great uplifted mountains. When they went up, then the oceans went down, so you expect large volumes of water to be rushing off the land. And this is the sheet flow phase of the flood. As the earth was covered with water, that water had to go somewhere. It went off the continents as the continents came up. And so then the end result was a lot of sheet erosion. You guys have, some of you have probably been to South Dakota and seen the Devil's Tower. You've been to Utah or Arizona and seen the huge mesas that are erosional remnants. So like the Devil's Tower is 1,100 feet tall. So 1,100 feet of sediments got washed away. That just gives you an idea how much that sheet flow phase was that came off the earth as the mountains went up and the oceans went down. Large erosion. Like you see the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is a wonderful exhibit for creationism. There's a lot of things about it that are really special. You see the layers in the Grand Canyon are all flat. Now I mentioned earlier, under the evolutionary worldview, each one of those layers was laid down independent over millions of years. The fossils inside those layers became alive through random mutation and went extinct in that layer. But yet, in the Grand Canyon, you don't see the deep erosion features that you would expect to see if that big layer was left out in the open for any period of time. Even 1 year, you would expect to see erosion, much less millions of years. So that's a big problem for evolutionary scientists, the fact that those bedding planes are flat as pancakes in the Grand Canyon. There should be huge erosional features in those layers if actually there was long periods of time. So you start to see that the evidence in the field doesn't really line up with long periods of time. You start to see that, right? You can see plainly that the creation point of view, the creation flood model is a better fit for some of the features you see in the earth, like the Grand Canyon. So the Grand Canyon, when you think about the flood, you think about the sheet flow phase of the flood as the mountains went up and the oceans went down. But also, as that water started to slow down, it got into the cutting phase. So there wasn't enough water to be a sheet. Now it started to cut. And so the Grand Canyon was cut during the the recessional water phase when it was a canyon cutting thing. So it was cut backwards. It's very obvious to see that the Grand Canyon was cut by a very large volume of water. Under the evolutionary point of view, they would say that the Colorado River cut that gigantic canyon over a long period of time. But you'll notice the canyon has many branches, many branches. It's not just a canyon, it's got many branches. They're very deep. There was obviously a big water event occurred there. Now the Colorado Plateau itself, around the Grand Canyon, has lots of other erosional features that are really special also that go into this idea that there was a lot of stuff going on down there in Colorado. It caused the surface features that you see today. The geomorphology of that area makes really good sense with lots of rushing water. So that's some of the big things about fossils. This here is a great book by Ariel Roth. Ariel Roth was one of the directors of the Geoscience Research Institute at Loma Linda. Great book here, and he gets this as a kind of a scholarly book. So if you want a little higher end book about creation versus evolution, this is a good place to go. Ariel Roth. Origins. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Here is a neat book. This is by Creation Ministries International, Ken Ham, Jonathan Fardy, and Carl Wieland. Answers. So I think they answer about 30-some questions that people have about creation versus evolution. So you can get this book. Great book for kids. This is a great book also for kids. It Couldn't Just Happen by Lawrence Richards. Lots of great faith-building stories in here for kids. Creation versus evolution. And the big question, of course, always is with dinosaurs, but we see very plainly the dinosaurs died in the inventory phase of the flood. The same with humans. Now, it's interesting that when you look at the fossil record, you don't see a lot of human remains. And you would think that humans would be kind of high up in the fossil record. And we also know that many, many hundreds and thousands of feet were washed off the earth during the sheet flow phase of the flood. So it makes a lot of sense that if humans were in the top of the fossil record or in the earth at the flood, then the fact that we don't find many of them kind of makes sense, as they were washed off the continental shelf. Around the continents, there's a shelf before it goes down into the ocean. And most of these sediments that we're talking about, like Devil's Tower and Grand Canyon, ended up around the continental shelf. So that's where those things went. Last time that Michael Ord was here, he had this book for sale. So if you didn't get that book, Frozen in Time, terrific book. This is about there's about 11 things he talks about in here, from the woolly mammoth to the ice age. So it takes a lot to create an ice age. When you look at our mountains here in this valley, those mountains weren't carved by 10 feet of snow or 100 feet of snow. They were carved by thousands of feet of snow. So it takes a big event to create an ice age. And Michael brings out the fact there's only one ice age. Most of the scientists believe that there was many, many, many ice ages about 200,000 years apart. But the earth really only bears witness of one. So that's the difference between the evolutionary point of view and the creation point of view, is the earth really only shows that there's something like the flood and the volcanism that accompanied the flood would cause an ice age. So Michael does a great job talking about, because he's a meteorologist, he was able to, they have programs today that model the entire earth with the jet stream, and to put together the idea, what temperature was the Arctic Ocean when the mammoths lived there? Because there is thousands of tons of mammoth tusks up in Siberia. Thousands of tons. So there was millions of mammoths in Siberia at one time, and it took a warm Arctic Ocean in order to make a steppe in Siberia that would support them. A steppe is like what's in the Serengeti today. It's a vast grassland. We would have had something like that in Siberia. So Michael did a great job talking about what kind of environment would it take to support 1 million mammoths and what happened to them. So we have those mammoths here in Montana too. So this is a great book if you haven't read that. This little Signs of the Time magazine has an article by Leonard Brand. If you watch Jeff Rich's In the Days of Noah, anybody watch that here? A few? Yeah, The Days of Noah. If you haven't watched that, boy, I would highly recommend it. Jeff poured it on and poured it out to produce and make that video available for the public. So he interviewed just hundreds of people. In fact, my friend Karen Jensen is even on that video. She's gone now, but it's wonderful that she's on that video. And Leonard Brand is on that video too. And he's talking in here about no middle ground. This is a big problem in the church today. Many Christians believe that we should leave the geology to the professionals and we'll just talk about theology. But the problem with God being the creator of the heavens and the earth, as we read earlier, is that He is the God of heaven. He is the creator of God of heaven, of the earth, the sea, and the sky. We owe Him allegiance because He is our creator. And so we need to take the Bible literally. And that's what Leonard Brand is talking about here. Can you take the Bible seriously, but not literally? Not very well. So it's important to be able to take the Bible literally when it says that He is the God and there is no one else. He was the God that made the heavens. He made the earth to be inhabited. We can take it as face value. That was God's purpose, to make the earth, and He made it to be inhabited. We know that the earth is on a real knife edge in our solar system. It's in exactly the right spot. As scientists have studied the cosmos, they have come to the conclusion that the earth is in exactly the right spot. With its way it's tilted, the way it rotates this time around the sun, it's a perfect place not only for water, but to support human beings. So God knew exactly what He was doing when He created the earth. I think it's important for us to understand that. Quite often we fall into this trap of theistic evolution. So Christians sometimes think, well, maybe there is something to this science thing, and maybe it took God 1,000,000 years, 6,000,000 years instead of 6 literal days. When we do that, we put God in a box, don't we? We limit his power. We're saying, well, that really wasn't the way it was in the Bible. We needed to add something to it. God made a mistake. Well, I'm here to tell you, God doesn't make mistakes. The Bible, you can take that Bible exactly what it says. We're finding more and more evidence support the creation flood model in the earth today, and we can have confidence in God and confidence in his word. So that's the essence of my talk today. I didn't want to go on too long. We're running a little out of time. So do you have any questions? Can I answer any questions somebody might have? Yeah.
When was the ice sheet here in North America?
So Michael Ord and many others have postulated that after the flood, about a year for the flood, the flood would have, and all the volcanism associated with it would have warmed up that Arctic Ocean to such a point that we would have got gigantic snowfall and finally got the amount of precipitation to cause the ice age. So when you look at the earth, there's really like the big ice fields up in Europe, and then the big ice field up in Canada, the Laurentide, the Columbia. There's these big ice fields that were associated with that. So this would have been, about 1,600 years after creation would have been the flood. So that's the time when the Mission Mountains were pushed up by the flood. Then these guys postulate about 500 years for the ice age to peak out, and then for the deglaciation phase. So as the ice age came to its maximum, then there was a deglaciation phase that you see here in the Mission Mountains. As the glaciers cut loose and started carving all that rock. See, you're all talking in the same period of time about, it's just the 500 years. They really kind of come up with about 700 years for this whole event, from the flood to the end of glaciation. One of the things that Michael talks about in his book, Frozen in Time, is the woolly mammoth. There's been lots of stories about the woolly mammoth being frozen in place and all this kind of stuff. But what they really find is the woolly mammoth, their whole head and their lungs are full of dust. So what they've come up with is that we got into the deglaciation phase. There was a lot of dust blowing. The glaciers were coming down, exposing a lot of rock and dirt, a lot of dust in the air. The mammoths turned their back to the dust, like you would see a horse out in the pasture today doing the same thing. Their lungs and their mouths are full of dust. As they were covered with dust, kind of like in the Great Dust Bowl here in America, you can see they have broken arms, they have broken legs, as they were covered up and actually crushed under the dust. So this is and then one thing that's really fascinating about what they've come up with in Siberia along these lines is that the elephant can't get along with permafrost. Those of you who are familiar with Russia know that in Siberia in the summertime, the muskeg, it's several feet deep, So elephants can't get along with that. So that step that had to be in place there wasn't like that. There was also not only mammoths, there was rhinos, there was hippos, there was fox, there was all kinds of other animals associated with the mammoth up in Siberia, not like it is today. This is before the formation of this frozen tundra that we have today. So that was all part of this, 500 years to 700 years, the flood to deglaciation that creation scientists really put together today. So it kind of makes sense that there was one ice age. After the mountains picked up, we have a warm ocean, we have a gigantic snowfall, we have enough snowfall to produce an ice age. We see the ice coming to a glacial maximum, then we see the glacial maximum pulling off, and we see the glaciers coming down, forming the earth that we see today. This is a big deal for mining because the glaciers pushed down a lot of that. The minerals up in the mountains were pushed down by the glaciers. And so guys like me were always picking up on that.
When you come south from Hot Springs and go over Merkel Pass into Camas Prairie, there's a pullout on the highway where you can see these giant ripple marks. And you mentioned as the ground was rose the water. Is that what made it?
No, I actually live right there. My house is right along there, right just out around the top of those ripple marks out on that Wolf's Gulch Road. So there's a neat story there because one of the guys that homesteaded right there in Hot Springs, at the bottom of the hill there, his name was Wilkes Markel. Okay, so then that's called Markel Hill, and then Wilkes Gulch, I live on, that goes along the top of all those ripples down through there. So that's called the Ice Lake Missoula. So that's a really cool deal. Like my place there in the Camas Prairie, you look at the watermarks on the hill, my place was under 400 feet of water. So the idea is that down on the Clark Fork River, as the Clark Fork and the Flathead get together and go down into Ponderay Lake, there was a glacier that came down and plugged up that canyon. So then the water backed up clear almost to Darby, almost to Drummond. It was clear. This valley was full. The Hot Springs area was full of water. And then we see that ice lake, that ice dam breaking and the water rushing out. So there's lots of evidence. That's what those marks are from. It's that water rushing out that was really deep, created those cool landforms you see there in the Camas Prairie. Those are called anti-dunes. They're about every 200 feet. They're about 35 feet tall. So that's kind of a famous place. Michael Ord used to bring church groups there. When he was here, I had a good talk with him. He used to bring tons and tons of people to the Camas Prairie right there on the way to my house to show them those cool ripple marks. Now, Harlan Bretz was a geologist that studied all the way from Camas Prairie to over eastern Washington and all the scab land in eastern Washington. He studied all of that, and he's the first one to propose a catastrophic flood caused the Grand Coulee, all the eastern Washington scab land, and all the geomorphology you see heading out that way. Well, he was really ridiculed for a long, long time because at that period of time, the geologists weren't into catastrophes. They just weren't going to include that word in their vocabulary. But Harlan was proved to be correct. And so today, a lot of geologists will tell you that they believe in long periods of time and catastrophe. So that's a very common thing today to hear from geologists. So yeah, that's what that's all about. Ice Lake Missoula is a cool local feature here in Montana. Any other question?
How long ago did that happen when the Lake Missoula went out?
See, that would be during the Ice Age. That would be the deglaciation phase of the Ice Age. You know, I don't know if you guys know, his name was Larry Crake. The Crakes up in Trout Creek. When my family and I, we went to South America, and he picked us up actually in an airplane, and Georgetown took us out to the mission field. But he used to give flights over here up and down the Clark Fork River, and he really thought that the ice plug came down the Troy Highway up towards Bull Lake. He thought that that's where the ice plug come. Just flying over it and looking at it. Because when you look at those mountains over there at Thompson Falls, one thing you notice about those mountains is what? No dirt. There's no dirt on them. They're just trees grown out of rocks. When you go up to Thompson Falls and look at all those mountains, they're bare mountains with just trees grown out of bare rock. All that soil got washed away in that Lake Missoula flood. So Jim Crake, that was his name, is Jim Crake. He really felt like the ice plug really came down the Bull River Highway when the glaciers were coming down. So that's all part of that deglaciation phase, maybe that 700 years from the flood to the end of glaciation. Now, one thing to really think about that really makes us wonder is, Noah's family was in the ark for a year, almost exactly a year, but then they were alive for this whole event, this whole ice age, the glaciation, the deglaciation. People went up over the land bridge and from Europe, up from the Fertile Crescent, up in the Holy Land, up into Europe, across the land bridge into Russia, down Alaska, and then down to the States into South America. So scientists have actually put together how long they think that would take for someone to go from, Babylon all the way to the end of South America. Yeah, it could happen. It could happen in what we see in recorded history without any trouble. So that's really kind of a cool deal. The scientists put together, the people who love to roam, the people who don't. Some people stayed behind, and each step of the way, others went on. And so they figured, yeah, it's very possible for people to come from the Fertile Crescent all the way up, all the way over, and all the way down. And it's really true for animals, too, as you see the distribution of all kinds of animals that you wouldn't expect to see. Like in the United Kingdom and in London, in that area, you see hippos up there. Hippos? Good grief, what's that all about? So you see the migration of animals in the same way as you saw the migration of people as they went up through Europe, over the land bridge, and then on down, So it's kind of a cool deal. The other thing about the ark is kind of neat is you may have heard stories about how is the ark big enough for all the different kinds of animals that we see today. Well, keep in mind, like today, the dog family is really big, right? Because we've bred dogs of every kind and every size. But there was only one dog kind on the ark. Amen? Yeah. So scientists have said, after studying this thing for many centuries, they've said, you know what? There's plenty of room on the ark for all the animal kinds we see on the earth today. So that's really good news. The scientists have continued to confirm that creation is a better fit than evolution. I want you to leave you with that today. I want you to understand that we're all dealing with historical science, and historical science is difficult. It's all about interpretation, but the creation flood model does a better job of fitting the evidence in the field. Any other questions? Okay, let's have our closing song. Maybe the girls could come up. We could sing our closing song, and I'll have a benediction.
Stand, please, for my Maker and my King. My Maker and my King, thy sovereignty is the spring whence all my blessings flow. Thy sovereign bounty is the spring whence all my blessings flow. The creature of thy hand, in thee alone I live. My God, thy benefits demand more praises I can give. My God, thy benefits demand more praise than I can give. Lord, what can I impart when all is thine before? Thy love demands a thankful heart, the gift allows some more. Thy love demands a thankful heart, the gift allows some more. Oh, let thy grace inspire my soul with strength divine. Let every word and each desire and all my days be thine. Let every word and each desire and all my days be thine.
Father in heaven, I just want to praise and thank you for the evidence that you have left behind in the fossil record and in the earth to help inspire us with confidence that you are our God. You are our Father in heaven. The gospel story is correct. There was an Adam and Eve. There was a garden. There was a mistake made, and we see the results here. But we're so thankful, Father, that you had a rescue plan from the foundation of the earth, that Jesus came to make a way for us to be with you forever. And we thank and praise you for that. We thank you in the lovely name, the wonderful name, the holy name of Jesus. Amen.